First of all, I need to introduce myself. My name is Ben. I am the Senior Coding Specialist here at Learning People. That's my name there. And just give you a brief history on me and Learning People, just so you kind of know who you're talking to and dealing with and whatnot. So I've been at Learning People for a little over 10 years, and Learning People is it's an organisation that I love working for because what we do, by and large, is facilitate people's learning, qualifications, portfolio, and career support. Basically, everything that has become necessary in today's world to actually achieve a new career in tech. That's kind of what we work on. It's careers in tech mostly. In my case, I specialize in coding. So generally, I'm helping people to get started with careers in things like web development, apps, games, data science. And in all my years of doing this, I can say quite confidently that I have seen the tech industry go through a lot of change. But the one thing that I think remains absolutely constant is the demand for coders. There's, well, it increases actually, that's the constant, is that it constantly increases every single year. So the gap between trained coders and all the coding jobs available, that gap is getting wider and wider every year. So for that reason alone, it's a great thing to get into. But for many other reasons, it's a very rewarding and I think desirable career choice, because it seems to tick all boxes for most people, where you can maybe work from home, you can travel, you can work less hours, do contract work. I don't know anybody that's unhappy with earning potential as a coder either. So seemingly it just seems to tick all the right boxes for most people. And I find that most people really get into it and really enjoy it as well. So for lots of reasons, coding is a great thing to get into. And the reason why I do these webinars, I generally do one of these kinds of webinars. I do one every month, but I change, and I do a coding workshop every 2 months or so, is because we find at the moment a large majority of our inquiries are from people that have heard, they're looking for a career change or a change in circumstance of some nature. It's different for each person, but they've heard that a coding career is a great thing to get into for obvious reasons, but they don't know where to start. They're a little bit worried. They've never done any coding before. They've heard all the myths about how you have to be a coding genius or a maths genius to be able to do it. I promise you, if I can do it, anybody can. I'm awful at math. So the purpose of these workshops that I do, like I say, every 2 or 3 months, is to show people some basic coding, particularly relating to web development, because it's just the easiest place to get started and to learn. And to hopefully demystify the whole thing and show people, look, it's actually not as scary as you might think. And also to give people a sense of how our training works and how it's delivered and if it's something they can get on with. And I hope that by the end of this session, you guys will be inspired to have a go for yourself. Because what I'm going to show you is one lesson, lesson 2, because lesson 1's, well, it's a bit boring. But we have a 5-lesson coding challenge where anybody can have a go. It's completely free. There's no strings attached, no commitments or timeframes or anything like that. Anybody can have a go. We can just email this over to you to have a go for yourself. And I'm going to show you lesson 2 because that's where it starts to get a bit more interesting. And yeah, you guys can follow along or just pay attention as we're going, and then I can send it out to you guys later. And just so you know as well, there is a Q&A section down the bottom of your Zoom screen there. And please pop any questions in there that you might have, and I'll endeavour to answer all of them at the end of the session. So to jump right in and share my screen with you so I can show you the code. 1 second. And I'll talk you through it, obviously, as I go. So this is what our training platform looks like. And just to cover a few bits of basics here, each lesson has a series of video and challenges that you complete along the way. And they're all across the top here, just easy for anybody to see. So you watch the videos here, and then these little book things are the challenges that you complete. Then you watch another video, then you've got more challenges and so on. And then on the right-hand side here, you have a result. So this is what you're trying to create. That's the challenge. And then most importantly, some people seem to miss this actually, but I find it personally easier to complete the challenges based off of the steps and to just follow the steps. But some people are more visual and they prefer to just go through the videos and do it that way. Some people do both, but we try to cater for both learning types. So if I expand this and I realise with my large screen that might be really small on your guys' monitor, so I'll try and expand that a bit so that you can see it. So just to talk through here, now there's a little bit of pre-written code here from the previous challenge, but it's fairly straightforward. So just to talk through the layout, the structure, which you will learn about another time, but for the purposes of this session, I'll talk you through it. So this is where your code goes, basically. That's where you're actually creating things. And then down the bottom here is where your project will show. So if I run this code, you'll see this is what's there right now, and I'll talk you through this. So the line 1 there, the document type is HTML. Now, you might not have heard of HTML before. It is the simplest type of code that you can learn. It's a web code. Every single website in the world has at least the front end of it coded in what's called HTML and CSS. Now, HTML just refers to the actual coding language. It actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Don't ask me why, I don't actually know what that means, but that's what it stands for. And CSS refers to the style, which is this section here, where you can style your code to make it, like you see over here, you can make it gold, you can make it in italicized, you can make font bigger, you can change the size and everything. So that's how you can start to get creative. Now, everything on an HTML document will be between the two, the opening tag and the closing tags. So when I say opening tag, you'll see here we've got HTML in pointy brackets, and then down here we have /HTML in pointy brackets. And this is the building blocks of HTML. Literally everything will have, well, bar a few exceptions, but basically everything will have an opening and closing tag, basically. And later on, you might hear me referring to the style element, for instance. And in code or in HTML, whenever you refer to the element, if I was to say the style element, I'm referring to everything between the opening and closing tags. Now, everything always has a header. It does here, and the star goes within the header. The title is just what that particular website would look like if it was on a website that has the tab at the top. And then we've got style, where, as I mentioned before, you can create different things with like the color, size, font, and so on. And then after that is the body. Now, the body is usually a lot bigger than that. The body is literally everything in a website. So the body element contains everything, all the text, images, pictures, videos, animation. It could be anything, but pretty much everything goes in the body. Now, you can see down below this particular website, and believe it or not, this is a website, a very simple one, albeit, but there's only 3 lines within the body, which is these 3 lines here. And H1, you see you've got an opening tag and a closing tag with a /H1 at the end there. And within that, we've written HTML. So why is HTML so successful? So that's H1, it stands for the header. There's different sizes of headers, H1, H2, H3, and so on. That's just the top of a website in most cases, or the top of like a section. You know, you want to kind of give a block of text a title or whatever. After that, we've got HTML is easy, and after that, and P just stands for paragraph, by the way. Basically, any blocks of text you see on a website is almost certainly written in the code as a paragraph. And then you'll also notice a couple of other things that are covered in a previous lesson. So the word easy here has got its own element around it, which is EM, that stands for emphasis, which makes things italicized. So you'll see down here, I hope you can see that, it's not too small, larger. But easy is italicized. And then you can also see the word fun here is wrapped in strong. When I say wrapped, that means we put something around a word or a sentence or a paragraph, which changes the state of it, which in this case changed it to bold. And to do that, the code, the tag for that is just called strong. The other thing I'll mention here is that Starwall already has something there, which is the body. And again, I'm going to talk through these things as best I can for the interest of this session. But not all of it's going to make sense. That's not the idea of this session. It's just to kind of show people that it can be done. But body, within the style, whenever you type body, it will then target the body down here. So it's that simple. I could write P there, I could write H1 up here, and we will do later. But right now we're targeting the body with a style rule. And then that style, the only rule that we have in it is that the font size is 14. Now, as an example, I could change that to 34 and run the code, and you'll see everything get much bigger. 14, 15, change that back to where it was before. Now, within the learning platform, one of the really useful things is obviously to watch the videos. I personally find it easier to just follow the steps. And I'll go through this with you guys, and then, like I said, I'll answer loads of questions at the end as best I can. It's quite easy to follow along, I think. We've designed it in such a way that it should be easy enough for most people, once they've watched the videos as well, and to follow along with these rules. And then you can run your code and test your code and make sure that it's working. And a lot of people get a lot of satisfaction out of actually understanding it and feeling like you're actually building something. So this is the code from the previous challenge, but what's different between this and between what we currently have and what they want us to create? So I think the first and most obvious is that the header is in gold. The word easy is just a little bit bigger than the rest, and the word fun just a little bit bigger still. So how do we do that? Let's just follow the steps. So the first step is to create an H1 rule within the style element and below the body, and to set the color property to gold. Now, you'll understand a little bit better that once you've watched the videos as well. So you can see we've already got a rule here for body, and we want to put it below that, and we put a little bit of a placeholder there to let you know that this is where you should start to put your rules. So it wants us to target H1, which is just the header, right? Literally all you do is type in H1. That's it. Nice and easy. And then it wants us to create a rule that makes the header gold. So within the style, whenever you're creating a rule, the rules are always within squiggly brackets. That's the only way it will understand. It won't understand otherwise. Just like above here, you can see that the font size is set to 14, and it's got its first squiggly bracket and its second squiggly bracket. Now, for the sake of this session, I personally prefer my code to be nice, neat, and tidy. So I'm just going to do it like this. Because the official way is to have the squiggly brackets on their own rules. If you're creating a lot of rules, that makes sense. In this instance, we're only going to have a couple of rules maybe for each thing. So I just don't need to put it on one line. So how do we make it gold? So first squiggly bracket. I want to change the color to gold. So I'm just going to type in color. Please note the American spelling of color. That's just something we have to deal with, I'm afraid. Now, you'll notice that the rule above, for instance, and what you want it to do is always separated by a colon. And again, it won't understand unless you do that. So I want the color to be gold. And then always close it out with a squiggly bracket, right squiggly bracket, otherwise it won't understand. And a couple of things that actually is worth mentioning is that most text editors have a way of letting you know if what you've done is kind of right or wrong. And in this instance, if I delete the R from color, it turns black, and it turns blue when it understands what you're targeting. So it's kind of letting you know, yeah, I know what you're doing, sort of thing. And again, the word gold, it's black until it understands what I'm actually trying to get it to do, gold. And it's always good, whenever you change your code, believe me, it's worth running it to make sure that it's working, basically. And as you can see down below here, our header is now turned to gold. And again, I could make that anything. I could say red and run it, and it will be red. We could literally do any color you could think of, and it will do exactly that. And we'll get into the specifics of how to find like really specific shades of things later on. You need that to be gold. It's always good to test when you're doing these challenges as well to make sure that you've got your first couple of passes. So the first two was that you've created an H1 rule and you set the color to gold. So it's always good to make sure that you're getting the passes along the way. So step number 3, create a P rule below the H1 rule. Step 4, to change the color property to dark slate gray. So it's currently black, just normal black, and it wants us to change it to dark slate gray, which is just a shade below black. So again, to target P, I would just type in P. And again, that means it's targeting these things here. You can even double check that as well. If you double click on this, it will kind of put a little, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it puts a little frame around it. So it's just kind of double letting you know that it knows what you're doing, it knows what you're trying to do. And then it wants us to create a rule that changes the color to dark slate gray. Now I've already created a color rule above, right? So I can just copy that and paste it below, run that. But of course, we don't want it all to be gold. That's the idea. It wants it to be dark slate gray. So in this case, I would just take that and replace gold with dark slate gray. Run the code, and then you can see it's not quite as dark as it was before. It's a nicer gray color. And again, always test to make sure that you're getting passes along the way. So the next thing is to create an EM rule and to set the font size to 20. So EM means that it's only going to target anything that is wrapped in emphasis. Now that could be a lot of things on a website. In this case, we only have the one thing wrapped in emphasis. That's italicized, which is the word easy just here, this word here. And it wants us to make that just a bit bigger. So again, all I would do is create an EM rule. Obviously, you guys will have more time to learn these things. I can guide you through some of it. I'm always really happy to do one-on-one sessions, but the videos are quite descriptive. They're quite good in that way. Yeah, I'm always happy to do one-on-one sessions because coding is one of those sorts of things where if you haven't done anything like this before, then it often you just need a teacher sometimes to just show you how to do it. And then suddenly you're like, oh my God, is that it? It's so easy. It's so simple. But yeah, a teacher is often necessary. So I've just grabbed the font size rule from above because we already had one. In this case, it wants it to be 20 pixels. And run that. So you should see the word easy get just a little bit bigger because we're targeting this here and changing its size. Boom. There we go. And then the final thing for this particular challenge is to create a strong rule that changes the font size to 20. So just like before, we're going to type in strong. So we're now targeting just the one word that is wrapped in strong, meaning it's bold. And we're going to take this rule from above, because believe me, as a coder, you will find as many shortcuts as you possibly can to be more efficient. And it wants the size to be 24 pixels. I run that, we see the word fun get a lot bigger. So that's basically everything. If I now test my code, it should tell me that all the tests on this particular challenge have been passed. And this particular challenge is a good example of just learning how to use the style rules so that you can be, and we're going to cover more for sure, but how you can start to be really creative with your website and the information and how it's presented. As a coder or web developer, one day your boss might come to you and say, we want the content on our website to be displayed exactly this way, in exactly this font, in this size, this color, any number of things. This is how you would achieve those things in the code while building a website, basically. There has been a question come through. Somebody, Shippy is asking, which is the best course to become a web developer? I'll go into more detail on that on the end, but we have two courses that you can potentially complete, which is either our full stack web development course. Full stack is one person that can do both front end and back end web development. So a very popular combination of skills. But depending on your circumstance, sometimes just doing the front end course first is more manageable for people, depending on like the time you have available, when and for how long you can study, and honestly affordability, these sorts of things. But I'll answer all of those questions at the end for sure. Okay, so if we come out of this now, we've completed this challenge, and we'll move on to the next one. I'll expand. So once again, it's done it in the way that I think looks messy for teaching purposes, even though it's the official way to be doing it. You might notice as well, after the rules, it's got a semicolon. So a semicolon is used to separate rules. If you're creating multiple rules for the same thing, which we're going to do shortly, then the rules within the squiggly brackets is always separated by a semicolon, and that's how the code can tell one rule from another, basically. But let's just tidy this up a little bit, like I say, for easier for teaching. I think it looks neater. Like I said, I just think that makes it a lot easier to be able to read. So let's run our code from the previous challenge, and you can see here once again on the right hand side there's a few differences. So first of all, the why is HTML so successful is now in a different font, and it's all in uppercase as well. You can also see the word easy is now green, and you can see the word fun is now in a pure black as opposed to a dark slate gray. So how do we get even more creative and start, being really specific with what it wants us to create? Step number 1 is to add a font family property to the body and set it to Arial. So that's nice and easy. So as I mentioned, this is the body. So that means we're going to be applying the font Arial to everything in the entire website. And as I mentioned before, we've already got a rule there that sets the size to font. So I set the font size to 14. And we want to create a new rule again within the squiggly brackets for the body. And in this instance, we're going to put in there that the font dash family. And again, remember, look, see it changes color when it knows what you're targeting. And the rule and what you want it to do is always separated by a colon. And in this case, we're going to make it Arial. So now when I run the code, we should see all of this change to Arial. Wonderful, nice and easy. Okay, and the second rule is to change the style declaration for H1 rule and set the hex format for the color property and set it to #FFD700. Now you might be wondering, and rightly so, what on earth is that? And that's fair. So whenever it comes to creating really specific colors, actually I'll see if I can get one up for you, because this will be a good example of hex. So the first thing that comes up, yeah, you can find this stuff anywhere. A hex code is the exact color. There's hex code and RGB code, regular green codes. And if your boss came to you one day as a web developer and he says to you, right, the guys up top think that all of the headers on our website should be the green and blue of our company branded colors. So we want you to go ahead and do that. Well, you can't just type in green and blue or orange or whatever it might be, because that's just going to be a really generic shade of that color and it's not going to match the brand colors. But what you can do, and most companies have these specific codes for their branded colors anyway, but what you can do is go to a hex code generator like this, and let's say they wanted it to be the blue of Luke Skywalker's lightsaber. You can tell I've done this before. Yeah, let's say about that. And it gives you this hex code right here for this color here. And I can literally take that and go back to our code. And where it says gold here, I can literally put in that color, run the code, and it changes to that exact blue that I just created. Now you can change the hues, the shades, and how cool or warm it is and so on. But that's how you would find really, really specific colors, is to find the specific hex code or RGB code, which we'll cover in a sec, for that particular color. And in this case, FFD700 is the standard hex code just for gold. So again, if I put this code in here, you'll see it change back to gold, because rather than typing in gold, it's just given us the hex code for gold. There you go. And again, please do drop any questions in there and I'll endeavour to answer them as I go or at the end. The next thing is to add a text transform property to the H1 rule and set the value to uppercase. So in the H1 rule, remember we've already got a rule there for the color, and then the rule and what you want it to be is always separated by a semicolon. And in this case, we are going to say text. I want it to transform to uppercase. And now when I run this code, it should change the header, the gold header, to uppercase. And you might think to yourself, well, why didn't you just write out the, I could have just written out the header in uppercase if I wanted to. And you could do that for sure. But there's times when, like, I'll give you an example. So again, your boss might come to you one day and he or she might say to you, well, again, we've decided that all of the headers, all the titles, whatever it might be on the website, we want them all to be uppercase, as well as this font and this color, or whatever it might be. And you might think to yourself, okay, well, there are thousands of pages on our website, just like with ours, there's thousands of pages on our website. So I might spend a week or two literally going into every single header and changing every single one to uppercase manually. And in the old days, you had to do that. Or you might just create a rule that says all H1 headers should have this rule, which means they're uppercase, regardless of how you've written it out. Doesn't matter. It's going to change it to uppercase. So again, it's kind of an example, this lesson, on how learning how to use those tools, the style rules, sorry, can make your life a lot easier as a coder. And so many things have been brought in over the years to improve efficiency and save time and so on. So Mark has asked, is there a limit to how many rules can be set in one go? No, absolutely not. So once you, I mean, in most cases, the style usually has lots of things in it. You can create, that's why usually they have the body, and then, for instance, it would have its first squiggly bracket on its own line, and then each rule on its own line after that, and then ending with a squiggly bracket. So that way you can just see, okay, squiggly bracket, each rule, end squiggly bracket. And that way, when you've got loads of rules, it's easier to read it that way for sure. When you've only got 2 or 3 rules for each thing, I personally find it easier to just put it all on one line. But no, there's no limit to how many rules you can create, and quite often people do make quite a lot. So let's continue, because we're kind of going to cover that stuff in a little bit as well. So the next thing is to create a color property for the EM rule. So this is how we're going to make the easy green, and this color type wants us to use an RGB code. So how do we do that? Now, RGB is, whenever you're finding colors for your website, basically there's 2 ways that you can find really specific colors, which is the hex codes that I just showed you, or with RGB codes, red, green, blue codes. And in this case, it wants us to create EM rule and set the color to this here. So I'm literally just going to grab that, because that is the color for just this kind of dark, like grassy green color. And under EM, again, we're going to create a new rule, set the color to RGB 01280. And those numbers change dramatically depending on the color that you're trying to create. But if I run it now, you should see easy turn green. I hope you can see that. It's not too small on my big screen. And then the second thing is to create a strong rule and create and use the RGB code of 000. Now that is just like a pure black. So once again, here where strong is, we're going to say color is this. And then again, I run that. We should see the kind of grayish word fun turn to a dark black now. See how it's kind of different to the stuff before it. Now, hopefully, if I test, it should tell me all tests have been passed. So I should have tested along the way there, but I kind of know how to do this one. So let's come out of that and look at the next one. But yeah, what I was saying before is that these are really good examples of how taking time to learn how to use the rules within the HTML code can make life a lot easier moving forward, believe me. So let's run our code and see what we've got. This is where things get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more challenging. The two main things here is that we can see there's a banner has been created. So that's usually created with what's called usually a division, a div element. So this here. So you can see sporting history is the header. And then underneath that, it's got a paragraph with just giants and heroes. And that's how they've created this red banner here at the top. And it's a useful tool on a website, I would say, especially if it's a website that perhaps has maybe a quite text heavy. It's quite nice to separate your website, or at least kind of put something nice at the top of it, make it just not look so white and glaring in your face sort of thing. You can start to get a bit more fun and creative with it. So the main difference is obviously our website so far at least does not have a banner. And all of this is pre-written for you, by the way, in the challenges. You don't have to write out all of this or anything. It just gives you this as an example on how you can, you might have created all of that yourself for the content of the website, and then you're going to style it afterwards to make it look nice and presentable. So the steps within this on how to create this, don't worry about any of this stuff up here just yet. The first thing is to add an ID attribute to the div element and give it the value of heading. Now, you'd be right in thinking, what on earth is an ID attribute? And that's fair because you haven't watched the video yet to learn it. So an ID attribute is a way that you can create a specific rule within the style that doesn't necessarily apply to anything, just by itself. But then you can apply it to other things later on. So this is quite useful if you want to create divisions like this, and I'll show you how to do it. So one thing I will draw your attention to is that a rule for this challenge has already been created. And the way that you create an ID rule, so we're not applying it to H1 or P for paragraph or anything like that. We're creating a set of rules that we can then apply to other things later on. And this is also quite useful because you might have your own style of how you want numerous things to look, and you can create your own set of rules and then apply them later on. In this case, you can call the rule anything, literally anything you wanted to call it. I could call it, hashtag Ben's crazy font styles or whatever. I could literally call it anything I want. Remember, the rules are always between squiggly brackets, and in this case, the font family is Arial. The background color is red, as you can see over here, and the color of the writing is now white, so it kind of stands out there. And they've called this rule heading, and I can apply that anywhere I want to make it work. Now, in this case, it says it wants to apply it to the div element because that's where the division has been created on the website. And inside the opening div element, I would literally just put ID equals heading, just like that. Now, the rule's already been created, and as long as you spelt it in exactly the same way as the rule that you created earlier and run your code, boom, there we go. Again, like learning how to create blocks of rules that you can then apply anywhere you want later on is quite useful later on as you really start getting into this and you're really trying to save time and be efficient and so on. The second thing is to add an ID attribute to the P element within the div element and to give it a value uppercase. So within the div element here, you can see we have the P element as it's described, the P element within the div element. And it wants us to make it uppercase. Now, we haven't created a rule for uppercase just yet. I'll do that afterwards, and I'll show you. So again, in here, ID equals uppercase. And then the third step is to create a rule on line 14 with hashtag uppercase, and then it wants us to text transform that rule to uppercase. So right here, I'm going to create a new rule. And an ID attribute rule always starts with a hashtag. There's different types of rules. We're going to do a different type of rule in the next one. But for an ID attribute, it's always just a hashtag. And we're going to call it uppercase. And then the rule for uppercase, remember, always within squiggly brackets, and it's going to be text. To uppercase. And remember, always close it out. Semicolon, always close it out with a squiggly bracket. And now what I've done is I've created a rule. Where is it? So yeah, I've created the rule within the opening P element there that says the ID for this particular element needs to be uppercase, which means it will then look for that rule above and will apply what I've told it to do. So now if I run this, we should see sports and heroes turn to uppercase with any luck. Excellent. Making progress. Now, if I test my code, it should tell me I passed the test. Okay, let's look at the next one. So the final challenge of lesson 2. And again, I hope you guys are following at least half of this, because again, the idea is not that you're going to follow all of it, but just kind of show you guys what coding is and maybe inspire you to have a go for yourself. Yeah, if you guys do want to have a go, we'll share my email address at the end. So please feel free to email me if you'd like to have a go. Or most likely you may have been in contact with us already. You may have a missed call from us or an email, a text message or something. Just get back to us, like re-engage with us and just say, hey, I just saw Ben do a little bit of the code challenge. I'd love to have a go myself, and they'll just send it right out to you. In this particular challenge, let's run our code and see what we've got. Now, the major differences here, you might see between ours and the example, is that the top 2 headers, track and field and rugby, are in orange, and the bottom 2 headers are in green. So remember before when we created an H1 rule that made everything a particular size, font, color, and so on? Well, what if we wanted different H1 or H3 headers to be, because I think these are H3 headers, yeah. So yeah, what if we wanted different H3 headers to be different colors? We can't just create one rule for all of them when we need or want them to be different colors, for instance, as an example. So what is used in that instance is what's called a class attribute. Now, class attributes are different to ID attributes. ID attributes are usually just applied to one thing. Not multiple things often. Whereas a class attributes are things that can often be applied to multiple things, throughout a website. Now, they both do largely the same thing, and I've seen people use ID attributes multiple times. I've seen people use class attributes just once. It doesn't really make too much difference, but that was their intended purpose, is to separate those things. To follow the steps on how we actually create class attributes to separate those H3 headers and make different colors, is to add a class attribute to the first 2 H3 elements and give them an attribute of sports history. So I'm just going to take sports history for the sake of ease. So the first 2 H3 headers then is this one here on line 31, track and field, and then line 36 with rugby. And just like before, in the opening element, we're going to extend that to class equals sports history. That's all it wanted us to do. And again, below, because we haven't created those rules, but yeah, I would do that in a minute. Okay, so step number 2 is to create a class attribute for the second 2 headers, the green ones, and give them each an attribute of computing history. Now, again, you can call these things anything you want. That's the way ID and class attributes work. You can call them anything you want. In this case, they're just calling it by the headers that have been used before. So the second 2 is here and here. So the first programmer, the class and again for this one, the first programmer and the first compiler. So we've put the rules where we want them to go now. So the first 2 have the rules, so the classes of sports history, and the second 2 of computing history. So now we actually need to create the rules to change those colors. So step number 3 is to create a style rule beneath the existing ID rules and has a corresponding class selector and name it sports history, and then it wants us to change that color to orange. Now, remember before I mentioned that ID attributes are always, those rules are always created with a hashtag and then whatever you want to call it. Now, class attributes are, they always start with just a dot. So in this case, we're going to do dot sports dash history. History, and then the rule is to just change the color to orange. That's right. And the rule is to change the color to orange. Close it. And now, hopefully, when I run my code, they should turn orange. Success. So once again, so I realize I do go through these things kind of quickly, and when you do it yourself, you'll have all the time in the world to really soak it up. And again, I'm always happy to do one-on-one sessions. But basically, we've created a rule that says anything with the class attribute. Remember, the full stop always creates a class attribute. So anything within the style with a full stop and then something after would be a class attribute, and the color of orange. And because we've applied that to the first two headers here and here, it's now just made those headers orange. So we're just telling it what to do all the time. Very bossy. And then it wants us to do the same thing with sports, so computing history. And in this case, to make it green though. So again, just here, I'll just pop it right below. You don't need to worry too much about like the exact layout. Now, this particular test can be a little bit picky sometimes, but in the real world, as long as your code is readable, like it wouldn't matter if I was to make loads of spaces in between and everything, it's going to read it the same either way, because what it's going by is, okay, well, there's a full stop there, so I know that you're creating a class attribute. And then after that, it's like, okay, well, there's the first bracket, so I know there's going to be a rule after that. Okay, there's the last bracket, so I know those are all of the rules that you want me to apply to this. So it doesn't really matter about the spacing too much. Now, typos do make a difference if you spell something wrong or whatever. Those things absolutely will make a difference. So what's going to just grab that just for the sake of ease. Oh no, what have I done? And change that to green. I run my code and hopefully, yes, these are now green. So that's just an example. That last challenge there is an example of, like I say, how you might have hundreds of different headers, and for each section of the website, you might be told that you need them all to be a different color. So, that's annoying. I could have just changed them all to one color, but okay, they've got to be different. In which case, that's okay. You can, you can create class attributes that allow you to change the color of each of those things. Guys, that is pretty much it. I can't believe I actually did that in time. I was told 45 minutes, and it has been 43 minutes. I did all right. Guys, pop your questions into the chat there if you have any. And I would say I would try to encourage you guys to get involved, like get in contact with us if you're thinking that you might be interested in learning about coding. You're not sure if it's right for you. This is exactly why we have this this coding assessment, is to give you a chance to just have a go and see how you take to it. And like I say, we can always offer some guidance if need be. To go back to Shilky's question there about which courses. So there are two major courses, which is front end and full stack. And just in case you guys haven't heard those terms before, that's okay. Believe me, that's perfectly normal. They generally refer to front end and to web development. And the reason why generally I recommend, if somebody is starting a career for the first time, looking at a career change into coding, I always recommend that web development is the best place to get started, because it's honestly, it's just easier to learn. It's quicker to learn. It's nicer for beginners for those reasons. But web development is also an area that has a huge amount of jobs available all the time. They tend to pay quite well. They tend to be quite flexible. And just to be very, very clear, though, I'm not saying that you guys should spend the rest of your lives as web developers. Many people, I think, are very happy with that. I'm just saying that it's a really smart place to get started, and you might move off into other things later on. Many of my students do. They'll move off into like games development or mainstream app development, general software, could be cybersecurity or data science or any number of other things that you could move off into later on. But it's just generally, and it's not just based on my experience, it's also based on a lot of data that's out there. Web development is just the nicest place to get started. And when it comes to web development, the process of building a website is always broken down into two halves, which is front end and back end. Front end is all the things that you can see and interact with on a website, the kind of stuff that we've just done. And back end is all the stuff that's kind of going on behind the scenes with the code that give great features to websites, like payment systems and e-commerce and price comparison features, and basically anything that requires, it's not just something you look at, it requires it to go grab information and do other things from other places. And then one person that does both of these things, front and back web development, is called a full stack web developer. And by far one of the highest paid jobs in the IT industry, extremely well respected and very flexible. You'll have your choice of jobs in most different areas. So the full stack course is usually my strongest recommendation, but then it can often come down to the time that you have available. It's a hefty course because you're basically learning front end and then back end. It's a big thing to learn. So you're looking at about 600 hours of study time there. But front end is sometimes more manageable because obviously it's shorter, you get your first job a little bit quicker, and then you can maybe do the back end stuff later. I've had some more questions come through. So Juliana has said, can you email us this presentation? And yes, we would love to. There's our team generally will kind of chop it up so it fits into a particular time frame on YouTube, but they're not going to take out anything interesting, probably just my bad jokes or whatever. And then, usually in the coming days, it will be emailed out to you, and it will be on our YouTube channel as well. So if for whatever reason you haven't received it, you can just check YouTube, or just ask us. If you'd like, you can ask me, you can email me directly and I'll just send you the link. I know about coding. Shilpi has asked again, I know about coding, but I don't know how to get the job. That is a great question. So this is actually something that we're really well known for. So if you notice the whole of my channel, we're well known for helping all of our students to get their first job. So I think what we do here largely is all about employability. And we take that stance with our students because anybody can see it. There are so many places out there that teach courses, and in many cases knowing full well those students aren't going to get jobs at the end of it. In fact, I can tell you categorically a large portion of my students already have done various courses from various places, or even degrees in computer science and software engineering and similar, and they're talking to the likes of me because they can't get a job. And it's always for the same reasons. What they've learnt is nothing close to what employers are interested in. And on top of that, it's usually purely theoretical. Most courses teach theoretical coding as opposed to actually teaching coding. And then you show up to an interview, you've got no portfolio, you've got no examples, no evidence of what you can do, and you get politely asked to leave. And rightly so. No offense, but you can't do the job. For these kinds of reasons, everything that we teach is very practical and very specific to what employers are asking us to teach. So we have, you might have seen on our website, we have what's called our Industry Advisory Council. The sole purpose of this council, and it's kind of the biggest tech names in the world are a part of our council. There's Microsoft, Netflix, Visa, PayPal, MasterCard, NASA, and there's hundreds of them. My point is, all of these organizations tell us what you guys need right now to start a career in tech. And the skills that you need on our courses are updated numerous times every single year, just to reflect what employers are asking for right now. Largely what you need to get started with a career in tech is three things. You've got to have the skills employers are looking for, qualifications ideally, and most importantly, a portfolio. You need some body of work, some body of evidence. So when you show up to an interview, you can say, look, here's what I can do. Here's what I can do for you. And of course, there's no clearer evidence of what you can do for them than to show them what you've done before, which is why as part of your training with us, you will build numerous websites with full support from us, of course, but you will build numerous websites and smaller projects as well, all of which are designed for you to show off different skills that we know employers are interested in seeing. So you feel quite confident going in and saying, look, here's what I can do. They might ask you some questions about it, which is great because You can answer those questions. You're the one that did it. You built those things with your own two hands. So when they ask questions, it's easy to answer. You did it. And in terms of actually getting that first job, we have a career team here, fantastic career team. I'm constantly impressed with them because there's, I think, 3 or 4 of them on that team now, all of which have extensive career history in IT recruitment. And they are fantastic as well. They'll go through every tiny detail with you, your CV, covering letters, recruitment agencies and job boards, your LinkedIn account. LinkedIn is probably the most important thing these days, honestly. I'd say that half of our students are getting their first jobs off the back of LinkedIn alone. So they'll spend time with you, building that out with you. And also interview hints and tips and prep. They'll talk with you both before and after every single interview. And this process continues. It's ongoing until you get your first job. And it's the same for every single student. I'd say it generally takes 6 to 8 weeks to get your first job, give or take. From the point that you start looking, I mean, with us, and then the point you get your first job offer, it's about 6 to 8 weeks. But whether it takes 6 weeks or 6 months, it really doesn't matter. They stay with you until you've secured that first job. So I hope that answers your question there. Dale has asked, good day, Ben. Good day, Dale. Can you cover PHP for the next session? I could do, but we generally don't teach that much PHP anymore because PHP is well, by and large, it's a back-end coding language. And most companies are using Python now, particularly for new projects. The only companies I find are using PHP for their websites because they built their website like 10 or 15 years ago. Like Facebook, for instance, Facebook still uses PHP for back-end. It's been recently found to have quite a lot of security issues. It's not quite as good for a lot of things as Python. Python's easier to learn. It's easier to use generally as well. So most companies, Python's quite good in terms of cybersecurity terms as well. So if a company has a choice over which back-end coding language to build their website with, well, they're going to choose Python hands down. It's the most popular. Well, yeah, actually, is now the most popular coding language in the world. It just overtook Java. It's also easier to learn. It's quicker to learn. It's more versatile. You can use it across a wide variety of different things, as opposed to just like PHP with back-end web development generally. So I could do, but we don't really teach PHP anymore, I'm afraid. So sometimes people do come to me and say, for this particular job I'm going for, I need to learn PHP as well, in which case we would include it as part of an add-on. So with the full stack course, for instance, or the front-end course, we could include PHP training if it's necessary for a job, but we wouldn't teach it on its own because just learning PHP is unlikely to get our students a job. And therefore, as I mentioned before, we are all about employability. So we don't teach anything unless it's going to get our students jobs at the end of it. Which is like, for instance, another reason why we stopped doing a games development course, because as good as the course was, the likelihood of getting a job in games development these days is slim, really slim. There's like 5 game companies that even have offices in the UK, and there's really limited options basically. So we just took the decision. Well, if they're not likely to get jobs, quite likely to get jobs at the end of it, then we don't want to do that. I am level 7 in my studies. I don't know what that means, sure people. Mark has asked, I am sorting out my course on Friday when applying for jobs. Do companies mind whether you have no experience or are currently learning? That's another great question. Thank you, Mark. So it depends which course you're doing, but if you're doing the front-end course, you'll probably have to finish that course before you'll be able to get your first job, because front-end is that's a job title in itself. They're not going to care that you don't have much experience. What they're going to care about is, can you do the job? So as I was saying before, there's never been enough people to fill all the coding related jobs. So they're not especially picky, as long as you can demonstrate that you can do the job. This is why so many graduates are not getting the jobs anymore, is because they have no demonstratable skills. Whereas as part of your front end or full stack program with us, you're going to build a portfolio of projects as you go. So by the end of it, you've got something to show to employers. And that's the most important thing. I would say having the right skills and qualification, obviously that's really, really important. But off the back of those things, getting interviews is easy. Honestly, I don't want to sound overconfident about that, but we really don't struggle to get our students interviews. But at interview stage, every student tells me, my career team tells me this all the time, it all boils down to that portfolio. Because employers these days are far more hesitant to take a chance on someone, especially when, HR laws in this country right now, they're, somebody has to be god awful at the job for like 6 months and have 10 warnings and all sorts of awful things before somebody who's useless, you can actually get rid of, which is, good and bad for different reasons. But because of that, employers are more cautious to make the first choice the right choice. And the best way to know if you can code is to see what you've built before. So that's why the portfolio is the most important thing. Now, if you're enrolling on Friday, Mark, on the full stack course, then actually about halfway through that, once you've completed all the front end stuff, you are employable at that point, and we often get our students jobs before they've even finished the full stack course. So it really just depends which course you're doing. But yes, I assure you, with our career team in particular, you're in safe hands. They'll go through every detail with you. It's not about your commercial experience. It's about what can you do? Can you do the job that you are applying for? Great. Can you demonstrate that? Can you show us what you've done before? That's what it generally comes down to. And Shilpi has asked, what do I need to do after that? After that, what do I need to do? I'm not sure what you mean by that exactly. I assume you mean like in getting the job, maybe? So I'd say get in touch. I don't know if you're talking with anybody here already, but if you get in touch, we'll talk you through the process, maybe get you set up on the coding assessment, and we'll talk through the different course options and which just might fit best for you. Look, I could waffle on all day. You can probably tell this is my jam. It's what I'm really passionate about. I love what we do. I love teaching. Please do get in touch with me. My email address should come across the screen at any second now. Please feel free to get in touch, and I'll endeavour to answer any questions that you might have. Or, of course, if you're already in contact with somebody at the Learning People, just go back to that person and say, hey, I just saw a great webinar in coding with that fella Ben, and I have some questions, or I'd like to have a go for myself, or whatever it might be. But I would say that's going to be me signing off. Thank you so much to everybody for spending time with me today. I know time is precious and it's difficult to find the time to do most of anything these days. So we do really, really appreciate it. And I hope that I'll hear from some of you soon, and maybe talk you through some of this in more detail and how it might relate to you specifically and your circumstance. But that's me signing off. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.